Many African countries have been knocking on the IMF's door for financial assistance to help with the novel COVID-19 pandemic. And as the virus prepares to plunge the continent into its deepest recession in decades, how far is the IMF in providing financial COVID-19 relief to those on the continent that need it the most? We are about to have that conversation, and my colleague Kenneth Igbomo from Lagos is joining us in this discussion with the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva. Kristalina, thanks so much for joining us on the show. Just an update really on how far the IMF is in engaging with African countries that have sought COVID-19 relief aid.
Well, let me first express my deepest sympathy to people that are affected on the continent by the pandemic, and even more so by the economic shock it has created. At the IMF, we responded very early with a commitment to rapidly increase emergency financing, and with the support of our shareholders, we actually doubled what we can provide. From the African countries, we have about 40 requests, and I'm very proud to say that already 21 sub-Saharan African countries have received financial support from the IMF, with Nigeria having the largest $3.4 billion financial assistance. We are aiming to continue with rapid approvals because we recognize speed is of an essence to help health systems cope with the pandemic, but also to help vulnerable people and vulnerable parts of the economy to cope. Our aim is to get some $18 billion into the hands of policymakers and rapidly flowing in support of the economies. And we have done two additional things for sub-Saharan Africa. One, we mobilized debt relief for the countries with low income to their debt service to the fund. 23 countries are able to not pay us for the next 6 months, and we would extend that most likely to 2 years. And then secondly, together with the president of the World Bank, we led the effort to come with a debt standstill for official bilateral creditors, and of course we call on private sector to also join it. When the economies are standing still, debt service also should stand still.
Kenneth here from Lagos, but I would like to know specifically on Nigeria what your assessment of that impact is on Nigeria, and what the scale of the emergency support needed for Nigeria is.
Well, the pandemic has not affected very large number of people, but it has spread in Nigeria, and rightly so, the government has taken precautionary measures by restricting the movement of people. Even with some easing as of today, it is still at a point when to protect people and therefore protect the economy, measures are in place. But very seriously, Nigeria is being hit by the economic fallout from this pandemic. It is hit because of measures it takes. It is hit because of spillover of the restrictions in the world economy. And it is then hit on top of it by the collapse of oil prices. To put this in numbers, for Africa, we project contraction of 1.25%. This is going to be a deeper contraction in our predictions in Nigeria. Actually, it would go from plus over 2% growth to minus 3.4. And while we are projecting recovery in 2021, it is going to be only a partial recovery. Therefore, difficult days ahead. And in that context, we very much welcome the decisive measures taken to protect the economy and also to protect the most vulnerable people in Nigeria. And what we project in a situation when the fiscal gap is going to be quite significant, somewhere in the order of $11 billion, that the injection from the fund and from other multilateral financial institutions is both critical and it is timely. We expect that collectively with the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and other partners of Nigeria, we can fill this gap halfway through, and then the country itself can take measures, reprioritize spending, make sure that there is some increase in domestic borrowing, so the economy can weather this very, very, very difficult time. We also very much welcome the fact that Nigeria actively asks for more accountability to the citizens of Nigeria in the money they get.
Kristalina, just to speak about South Africa for a second, because we're one of the countries that has approached the IMF for financial assistance. You mentioned some $18 billion that the IMF was hoping to disperse in the region for COVID-19 related aid. How much of that is likely to come to South Africa? And also, what are some of the T's and C's that would accompany that lending to South Africa?
So the decision we have taken in the context of COVID-19 is to double access to emergency financing. Each of the members in this crisis can obtain up to 100% of their quota in the IMF. They have to declare how much they would like to receive, but this is a significant financial resource. We are now in discussion with South Africa. Given that this is a crisis because of exogenous shock, a health crisis, we do not work with the traditional conditionalities and program parameters we would have in circumstances when the crisis is due to internal factors. What we are asking countries in their letter of intent to the fund, in which they state what they want to use the money for, is to prioritize two things. Prioritize health systems, pay doctors, nurses, sustain hospitals, and prioritize support for the most vulnerable people through social safety nets and other programs, and to most vulnerable parts of the economy. And in that sense, we expect, as we have this discussion with South Africa, to reach a conclusion around the volume that would be within this parameter of up to 100% of South Africa's quota. One very important message we sent to everybody, and it was in the case of Nigeria as well, is yes, spend, because you have to support the economy going over this difficult time. It's like building a bridge. But keep the receipts. We cannot afford to have accountability and transparency take a back seat. And I'm very pleasantly impressed by how many countries actually, in their letter of intent, tell us how they are going to audit their spending and make this transparent. Very, very important to retain the trust of people who are going through such a difficult time.
So, hi, Kristalina. So, on the approved assistance to Nigeria, though, I'm trying to understand what sort of timelines we're looking at here for this disbursement of the 3.4 billion for Nigeria, and will the funds come in tranches?
We have already disbursed in emergency assistance. The board approves, and then within days we disburse the funds to the country. It goes into the central bank in dollars, and then it gets transferred into nairas in the case of Nigeria. The conditions are quite favorable. The repayment period is 5 years. Up to 3.5 years is grace period, and the interest on the loan is 1%. So in that sense, our members can benefit more directly through the fund from very low interest rates globally. We also have a number of safeguards when we provide financial support to countries. Obviously, countries that have got approved have met and exceeded these safeguards.
And just finally, Kristalina, what's your view on Nigeria and Africa's opportunity here as a whole to build resilient healthcare systems in their respective countries?
Well, across Africa, as it is the case across the whole world, this crisis puts pressure on moving fast in digitalization and transforming how societies and economies work. And I very much hope that Africa, that has been geared towards that kind of transformation, actually comes out of this crisis with a stronger capacity to be part of the new knowledge economy. That means, however, that countries do need to sustain, after COVID-19, investments in health and education, in human capital, critical for success, and also prioritize their public investments in a way that support that kind of transformation. Across Africa, governments have started recognizing how important it is to build buffers so they can weather better shocks. In the case of Nigeria, the finance minister rightly is setting a target to increase the share of tax to GDP. Before the crisis, it was 8%. This year, because of drop in revenues, it may even shrink down to 5%, but the objective over 5 years is to lift it up to 15%. And if I have one message to everybody, it is use this crisis to transform to a more resilient economy. And that means build buffers, look at opportunities, and very important, make sure that you come with more fair distribution of the benefits of growth, with less inequality, not more.
All right, well, Kristalina, you've kind of touched a little on what areas you think the funds should be utilized, but I'd like to also know, if you're working with the government to monitor, how the funds are being implemented and also the outcomes that are going to come out of the funds.
Well, our concentration is on 3 things. One, policy measures that governments take to deal with the crisis now, and then to move towards responsible reopening of the economies and build a strong recovery. We have put in place a policy action tracker, 193 countries, and you can see what measures other countries are taking. So the fund is a transmission line of this policy experience that for everybody is very valuable, because this is a crisis like no other, and we do need to learn fast from each other. Secondly, the fund put the first line of defense. This is our emergency financing, but we recognize that we may need to do more. Support countries to deal with the fallout from the crisis. There will be more debt, more deficit, very likely bankruptcies and unemployment. As much as we are trying to shield countries, it is likely that this would happen. So the fund is prepared to further engage with countries. And three, we are very keen to look ahead and say, what is it that we can do today to come out of this crisis stronger, not weaker? And in that regard, there are problems we knew we had. Now is a good moment, as we are faced with this shock, to concentrate on addressing them.
And Kristalina, just, I mean, one of those problems many would say was the dependency on global supply chains on certain parts of the world as opposed to others. And today we're having this conversation as there's news around the US and China playing the blame game amongst each other, and many saying that, you know, this kind of rhetoric really minimizing or taking the focus of the importance of fighting COVID-19 globally and together. In your view, how important is a global response to dealing with the COVID-19 shock, and perhaps maybe just your sentiments on resurfaced trade tensions and the impact that this could have in diluting that global response?
Well, clearly this is a global challenge and it does require global response. More than that, unprecedented. And therefore, even more, we need to work together. To give one positive example, today there was a call to mobilize in making vaccine not only as quickly as possible available, but making it accessible fairly by everyone, by countries rich and poor, people rich and poor. And that kind of unity of purpose, that this alliance that was launched today with many partners coming together, this is what we need in this time of crisis. I can say that within the International Monetary Fund membership, we actually have seen mobilization, and we have actually brought up that sense of unity during our spring meetings when two things have been decided. One is a very strong package of measures for the IMF to lean forward, increase triple concessional financing, and increase its capacity to serve the membership. And two, it was the call for debt standstill. So my message is that we all have responsibility to drive collaboration in the face of this crisis and also the crisis to come. We are not talking much these days about the climate crisis, but people in Africa know how severe the shocks of droughts and floods and the impact they have on agriculture, on the well-being of people are. So we have to, as a global community, we have to recognize that we live on this small planet together. We are interdependent, and we have to nurture collaboration, not erode it. That applies also for trade. Yes, we are now seeing some reversal in this area, but we know from the thousands of years of our human history that when we have division of labor and we produce what we are best at, that makes us all better off. So longer term, I'm confident that we would see that mutual reliance to be the one that makes the world a richer world, more productive, and therefore lives of people being better.
All right, but Kristalina, I'm still looking at the pandemic response, though.
Ken, go ahead.
All right, so still looking at the pandemic response, I'd just like to get your sense in the medium to the long term, what range of financing tools and options are available from the IMF for member countries?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. We actually have been reinforced by the membership significantly. We have $1 trillion lending capacity. This is 4 times more than what we had prior to the global financial crisis. We are deploying it now for emergency financing, but medium-long term, we recognize there would be a need for many countries to reinforce their capabilities to underpin a recovery. We know that there would be a need for fiscal stimulus for the recovery, and we also know that there are many countries with limited fiscal space, and that is why the fund was created, to help countries overcome the pressures that they may have on their balance of payment, on their government finances. We will be, of course, applying the more traditional instruments in the future. They would require discussions with governments on objectives and how these objectives can be achieved. But let me flag one big difference between what we are faced now with, medium-long term, and what people have as an image of the fund from the past. And it is in one word. The word is austerity. We are not aiming for that. On the contrary, what we want to see is responsible financing of recovery with as fair distribution of the costs and benefits across the economy and across societies.
Kristalina, thanks so much there for your generous time. Kristalina Georgieva, the Managing Director of the IMF, joining us.